Heidi, welcome back to changeNOW. You've got the other Vincenzi this time.
So happy to be back. So glad to see you.
It is wonderful to see you. I am going to be that person who asks some of the really silly questions. What on earth does a glaciologist do?
Right, it's not a very common job, I can assume. Even my parents, I think, don't really get what I get to do today. So a glaciologist is very simple. What I get to do is to study ice. I'm like a medical doctor for glaciers, basically. So I get to travel to these faraway regions of the world, the Arctic, Antarctica, the big mountains, try to study how glaciers react to climate change, and try to see how the water cycle is being affected by this.
So all of this study, what do you now know about the impact of glaciers on climate change and climate? Like, what is the impact of snow and ice?
Yeah, I mean, snow and ice, first of all, is extremely precious. I think we are all aware in the room here today that we are on the verge of a planetary water crisis. This is how bad the situation is right now. And actually, when you look at snow and ice hold 70% of fresh water resources on Earth. So we desperately need snow and ice to stay where they are, to stay healthy. The problem is that, of course, snow and ice are reacting very quickly to climate change. And the more you melt snow and ice, the more you catalyze the melting of snow and ice, the warmer the planet gets. And that's your entire water cycle that is being affected by this. It's very simple. Snow and ice are white. They reflect solar radiation back into space, like on the stage here today. And if you decrease those white surfaces, instead you have darker surfaces that absorb solar radiation, that catalyze the warming of the planet.
So when we're talking snow and ice, are we talking Arctic? Because as soon as I start thinking about ice, we talk about the ice caps and snow, and I think the Arctic. Am I the only one who's thinking it must be the Arctic, or are there other places where glaciers exist?
Yeah, you have a very good question here. You have a good point. So obviously, yes, there is a ton of ice in the Arctic. You have ice sheets. You have the Greenland ice sheet, for example. You have mountain glaciers. You have also sea ice, so ice covering the ocean. But there is ice, lucky me, in many other places in the world. Just look at the Alps. Last night, I was giving a talk in the French Alps. They still have a lot of beautiful glaciers there, and they need the glaciers in order to open their tap and to get fresh water in their homes. You have, of course, the glaciers of the Himalayas, and think about the billions of people. India, I was so glad to hear about the solutions being developed in India, because India still today desperately depends upon the glaciers of the Himalayas. And then the place where you have the most ice on Earth is Antarctica. Antarctica is around the South Pole, so down there, and it basically is 23 times the size of France, and it holds enough ice to increase sea levels globally by 58 meters. So there is a lot of ice everywhere on Earth, and again, we need this ice to stay healthy.
So you're not just based in Antarctica all the time?
No, but I like cold places, that's for sure.
you must really love them. I've said it a couple of times today, and I've now got the opportunity to get to the bottom of it. So in your intro, I mentioned that for those of us who are here in the developed world, we turn on a tap, and the water just seemingly flows out in abundance. Are we living under a false sense of security in terms of our understanding of the availability of water? Because to me, at least, it feels abundant. Have we got this wrong?
Look, it's very simple. You look at places like southwest France right now, where there are villages, there are cities that when they open the tap, there is no water. So they need to have bottled water coming by trucks to bring them fresh water so they can have something to drink, something to cook with. We are already in a crisis, and I think in a country like France, Spain, or Italy, and also Austria, we fully understand today how dire the situation is. We really are on the verge of this water planetary crisis, and we need to preserve this resource as much as we can. Not only the quantity of water, but as we saw with the solutions we've just heard about, the quality of this water is extremely precious.
So how do we end up with a situation in France where we're not turning the tap on? What are we missing?
Yeah, you know, we've had a massive drought for the past few months. We've had barely any rain during the winter months, and the winter months are so important because this is typically when you get a lot of rain, when the rain will recharge the groundwater, the aquifers in the ground. Winter is also typically when you have snow, and snow is, again, a massive resource of water that will melt during the spring. And we really struggled. No rain, barely any snow. So the groundwater aquifers couldn't be fully recharged during the winter months. And now, as you can see, everything is starting to grow. The trees, the crops, the grass, and they desperately need to have access to this groundwater, but it's not fully there. And this is why there are places in France where today, in 2023, we cannot guarantee this basic human right of having access to fresh water.
So I'm now thinking, as a Brit, I should stop complaining about the rain. Rain is necessary.
That's for sure.
I'm going to have to rethink my complaint about the rain. We've got Edenanke who's joining us a little bit later. For those of you who came to listen to her speak today, we had a few challenges with the interweb, but she is on next, so it's good to know. So no need to go anywhere. We did manage to get her connected. But what are some of the bigger challenges, potential implications, and we'll hear a little bit more about Lake Chad in a moment, when we don't have those fresh water supplies? So we're seeing there's no rain, you know, this is the trickle effect, but we're kind of seeing in France almost the beginnings of what that looks like. Lake Chad is towards the end of what that looks like. How bad does it get if we're not thinking about conserving and protecting water supplies?
I think it's very simple. Just try to stop drinking today. Just stop now and see what happens. It's very clear that the tensions will increase. They're already really, really important, both in Latin America and South America and Africa already. In France, you can see the tensions are rising because the question is, how are we using the water that is left today? Who is getting the priority? Are we giving the priority to people who need to drink? Are we giving the priority to growing crops, producing food? Are we giving the priority to using this water to produce hydroelectricity? This is a huge question today, the governance of this water. And what we're seeing is that because the tensions are rising, we're trying to kind of privatize water in a few places. In France at the moment, there is really big tension when it comes to agriculture. Agriculture are building these massive artificial lakes to try to save a little bit of the water. Sometimes they pump it from the groundwater to fill up these lakes. But then they get access to this water, but what about the ecosystems? What about nature? What about all the other users of this water? So today we really need to think long and hard about how do we prioritize this water. And we should never forget that it's not just us, human beings, nature, the ecosystems upon which we desperately depend today, they also need water. So let's also save the water for them.
Speaking of saving water, we just heard of 3 amazing solutions. And we need to move sometimes to solutions that are developed that solve the problem. In your view, what makes a good solution? Because there can be lots of solutions out there, but sometimes solutions create unintended consequences. So when we are looking to say, we sat in this talk today and we awakened our minds to we need to do something better, and then we go out and we try and buy something or do something, but we create a different problem and move it down the chain. What makes a great solution to supporting water scarcity?
First of all, I must say I'm absolutely mind-blown by the solutions that were described this morning, so thank you so much for those. We really, really need them. I think the first thing that's very important when it comes to water is to think about nature. Nature is the best way to store water, to filter water, making sure that our soils are healthy, to continue being permeable, storing water, making sure our forests are healthy, making sure we preserve wetlands, because they are amazing, fantastic natural machines at storing and filtering the water. So that's very important. When it comes to technological solutions, of course, we need to think long-term, and I think all 3 of you definitely have this in mind. I had a teacher at school who would always say, you never fully solve problems, but you shift the problem somewhere else, which is exactly what you described. Well, let's think long term. Let's continue thinking about planetary limits. Let's think about all the resources that we use to implement these new solutions. But they tick a lot of boxes. It's not just saving water, saving energy, saving money. It's the quality of life as well. And we need to tick a lot of boxes today. It's not just the climate crisis. It's a societal crisis. It's a biodiversity crisis. So we need to tick a lot of boxes when we think of solutions, and these ones definitely do.
So step one, let's remember nature is designed to do a lot of this legwork for us. And we can't forget about it. We need to continue to protect and look after it. And by doing so, it'll do some of this hard work for us. But in the meanwhile, we need some additional solutions to support those efforts. And when we're looking at solutions, as individuals, as companies, as governments, the more of the boxes that we can tick, the better. Is that your advice?
Yeah, totally. It's that simple.
What do you think the opportunity is for the individual? We've heard about solutions, and I'm going to ask you the same in terms of governments. But as everything is made, every company, every government is made out of people, and each of us can do something. We could leave this room today and do something different. Where is the opportunity for us? What could we just do to make a difference?
Yeah, very simple steps. Start with educating yourself on these issues. That's super important. Of course, we need to understand how precious this water resource is. Second thing, calculate your water footprint. I'm sure you've all heard about the carbon footprint, climate footprint. Calculate the same for your water footprint. It will be in your clothes, also in the food, in the transportation, in the energy systems that you use in your daily lives. And find something in this water footprint that you can drastically improve. Focus, and do this. Then, of course, talk about this with your colleagues and try to use your voice in your local city council, village council. Discuss all together, collectively, how can we preserve the fresh water resources we have? How can we protect the quality and the quantity of the water? And then, as you said, as individuals, we can only go so far. First of all, we have to work collectively, but then we have to look at the companies, we have to look at the governments, and we need to have them rise to the challenge that it is the water crisis and the climate crisis. We really, really need them to implement really ambitious, perhaps sometimes radical, decisions when it comes to protecting water resources. Right now, in my country, I'll say it. In my country, we're implementing so-called solutions that give us a sense of delaying the water crisis. But the long-term implications could be disastrous. So we need the governments to keep working with scientists. Please, use us. We are available. We really need to support the energy transition. We need to support how we preserve these water resources. But we absolutely need them to understand that there are basic human needs that we need to preserve. And then we can see what we do with the rest of the water we have access to. But let's focus on what the most important things are. Let's make sure that we're not crossing any more planetary boundaries. Let's make sure we preserve these ecosystems. And then maybe we can think of things that are a bit more superficial.
And what do you say for organizations? So governments, bold steps, work with scientists, individuals. We know carbon footprints. We need to understand our water footprint and commit to making bold steps. What can companies do? I mean,
it's tremendous. Companies can do so much because we all know here in the room, and changeNOW is all about this, right? We know how quickly companies can react to crisis. We also know that today, when we look at the biggest companies in the world, we know that if they were taking into account their footprints on nature, on the environment, on the climate, they would all fail. They would all be bankrupt because at the moment we're not really good at thinking about the value of this. I'll give you a very simple example. A wetland. A wetland, when we look at this, we're like, okay, it's a bit watery, it's a bit muddy, what is this use for us? Well, a wetland is priceless. A wetland today can be a carbon sink. A wetland today is where you have the highest biodiversity on Earth. A wetland today stores water, filters water. When there is a huge amount of rain coming in, a wetland will be able to absorb this. Imagine Even us human beings cannot recreate this. But today, I'm not able to tell a company or a government the economic value of a wetland. To be fair, it's probably priceless. But we're so much better at saying, oh, let's create an artificial lake. And I can totally say to a farmer, to a company, the economic value of this artificial lake. See the gap that we have here in terms of knowledge, in terms of information. So we need to preserve these ecosystem services desperately. And this is what I would tell companies, that think about the value of the nature you work with. This could be very positive or this could be very negative, but in terms of accounting, financing, we really need to take into account the true value of nature.
Wow, so much for us to consider here as a result of this conversation. If you were to leave us with a single sentence of hope, what would that be?
You know, there is hope, and this is why we're all here in the room today. I'm sure all of us want to change things. And what I want to say is that the only way we will manage to change our societies, the only way we will manage to save humanity, because this is truly what it's about today, is by working collectively. This is the only way. It's very simple. Right now, tensions are rising all over the world. Tensions are rising in my country, here in France. But we need to grow up a bit. We need to rise to the challenge. Let's talk to your neighbor. Let's talk to the people working on solutions. Let's talk to the scientists. And this is truly the way we will be able to change the world. And we have, as you could see this morning, all the solutions in our hands. Let's implement them, and let's continue to work together.
Fantastic. Heidi, that is absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.